And we're live. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Justin and you're on Fast Entrepreneur. How's that? Does that help with anything? Probably not. Alright, I figured I'd try something a little different. Just want to share some thoughts as I'm driving. Most of them are probably going to be around AI, just what I'm thinking about. If you find this format helpful, please put in the comments, let me know. Maybe I'll do it again. I don't really know who's watching all the time and what they're thinking about and what you're looking for. But if there's anything that I could say that can help anybody out, think about something different or take some action, that's great. All right, let's get into it. So, a few things. Yeah, I don't know, the lighting's pretty bad, but I don't really know what to do. I mean, I guess I could always do something like that. Oh, wow, that's kind of like trippy. I don't even know. Who knows anymore? I don't even know if I like that. It's like Halloween. All right. Anyways, we're talking about AI. Got this light blinding in my face. But, I'm not optimizing these videos. Sometimes I'll just maybe ask Grok or something, give me a few hundred keywords or something. Blah, blah, blah. But, I haven't really spent much time on it. This channel, I used to talk a lot more about crypto in the years past. I still think the blockchain, the technology is amazing. But we've got AI, and I think AI is the thing that is capturing my attention. So that's what I'm going to be sharing here. All right. So just a few things I wanted to touch. I was watching a guy with a beard. Sounds like he's got some experience in software development, software engineering, and he was talking, more about AI and the tokens, specifically the tokens. We're not talking about like crypto tokens or tokenomics in that regard. We're talking about like the unit of intelligence, like AI intelligence, right? When you use a chatbot, like, I don't know what's your favorite one. Maybe it's Gemini, maybe it's Grok, maybe it's, Claude, whatever. Maybe it's one of those open source ones. When you use them, a lot of times you're using and paying for these tokens, unless you run them locally. I mean, sometimes people are doing that, but I'm just talking about the API costs here and the tokens that people are paying for. And, the big question that I've been having and been looking into most recently is, we're thinking about, okay, so what's the goal here? It seems like we're moving where instead of you having to write code and all this, what you're doing is now you're trying to input stuff and output stuff. And if you can be competitive, right? If you don't have to pay as much for those inputs and outputs as the economic output, like the money, the revenue, the profit that you can make on the other side, maybe you're onto something, this might, as it gets more and more competitive, right, then again, maybe margins shrink. But, I don't know, I got a lot of thoughts, but let's just hang on that for a second. So, if you're not familiar, some of these models, let's just say, 1 million, tokens, and it is different. The input tokens for a lot of these models, like what you put into the chat, versus what it gives you back, right? You're paying for usually at different rates for those. So, people are trying to figure out, well, how can you make it so that, you're not just wasting tokens, so that you're not just like putting a bunch of stuff in that maybe doesn't need to be in, or that you're getting too verbose of an answer out. And some people might not care, but if you're running, especially like these agentic AIs, right? Like a lot of people, we've been talking about OpenClaw and things like that. If you're running models that there's just a lot happening, or maybe agents talking to other agents and doing other things, this is something to keep an eye on. So I think what we've seen is just the big trends. We're seeing the cost of these things go down and down. And at the same time, we're seeing these models, the capabilities go up and up, which I think is interesting because basically what it's saying is, for this almost like the same amount of money, now versus say just a few years ago, we have these models are just wildly better, right? Especially I'm talking about like the frontier ones. So you definitely have more capabilities. And for some of you, you may not need, the top-notch, at the current moment, like Opus 4.6 or, Gemini 3.1 or, maybe, OpenAI, what do we have, 5.2, yada, yada. So, but I say this because, you might want to, depending on what you're doing, you might want to use, like, say, the frontier models for, like, your hard stuff, your big brain stuff. And then the other stuff, you might want to delegate to some of these other things that aren't as token hungry. So you've got some protocols, we've discussed, like, Open Router. That might be something you want to use. It's just interesting just to look at some of the stats from there. You can go check it out. You basically have a lot of models, but instead of signing up for API keys individually, you got, like, one hub. And I've seen people do that, with, like, their open claw setups or whatever, where you can kind of, like, delegate. So you have, like, maybe 4 different brains, right? You got your big brain, you got your mid brain, you got your small brain, and let's just say you got your, no offense, like your reptilian brain, right? Like, just do the stuff, but you don't have to be that smart. But where is this going? So let's say you've got, like, large companies now that are starting to invest heavily into, into AI, and they're looking, they don't want to just throw money away. So maybe to stay on the cutting edge and maybe to push the boundaries. But for the rest of us, I mean, I don't know. It almost seems like you'll get to a point where some of these models are just so good that it basically does pretty much everything you need it to do and more, that you might not even need any, greater breakthrough of a model to do your use case. And in that case, maybe, this cost of intelligence, this marginal cost, just drops and drops and drops, as we're approaching, it seems like zero. So, all right, that's that. I just wanted to bring it up, but I think that's important to think about, and I think that when we're framing it, it's like, it's like strategy. It's like a sport. Like, how much, like, what is your vision, and how succinctly can you give that vision to a model and get a desired outcome, that costs you basically the least amount of tokens on the other side. So, and then, some people are saying, if you think about it, like, from a GPU standpoint, right, these are being run somewhere, these calculations on, what are they, neural nets on GPUs, and, this is like hardware stuff. So it's like how efficient you can be with a piece of hardware, like piece of silicon and whatever, to get things out. So, interesting stuff. All right. What else? I mean, there'll be more to come. I'm more just, speaking out loud, and also speaking, strategy. Like, what things should you be giving your chats or your agents? Are there certain ways to phrase them? Are there certain things to refer? Are there ways to better compress or compact? I mean, there's probably a lot that goes into this that, can be flushed out in the future. Let's see, what else? What else is on my mind? Well, today I was looking at Jimmy. Go chat with Jimmy. You don't know what I'm talking about. So this is a model. I think it's got like 1 million context window, but it was like instant. You basically, it's by the boom, and all your answers there. There's like no waiting. So, Imad Mustaq wrote, hey, if you haven't figured out this isn't for humans, this is for agents. I think he's probably spot on. If you don't know who he is, you can look him up. I think he's awesome. He's done a lot with Stable Diffusion. Now he's doing things with intelligent AI. Just, smart guy. And, we are moving into this next phase of agents doing more and more on their, on their own. And they don't really need us. They don't need to wait like us. They don't need to talk like us. They don't probably need our languages like us. And so more and more things are seemingly being built for agents, and, maybe not us. While I'm on the topic, I was just looking at Google's, basically like MCP here, I guess, to browse the web. But if you're thinking, most of these websites, almost every website that we've had, was designed for human beings in mind, how we would interact with them. But agents don't need to do that. maybe there's a better way. And so it looks like Google's on that, and I don't know if it's out to the public, but different framework. What else was on my mind recently that I was going to discuss? Let's go back to OpenClaw, because I've been talking about this. So if you have been following, and what's interesting is I still think there's a lot of people now that are using chatbots, right? That were maybe not doing so a year or two ago. But I don't think a lot of people really know what we're talking about when we talk about agents, or things like open source, like OpenClaw, etc. Or even further, especially there's specialized people that maybe code using Claude Code, Codex, etc. So we are early, and there's certainly a learning gap, and not everybody, I would say, is probably prime time to use every and all tools. So maybe find out what's best for you, given your skill set and also your limitations. But I wanted to say, with OpenClaw, I've been following it now ever since it kind of hit real big just a few weeks ago. A lot has changed. Steinberger, now OpenAI, what does that claw do? Clutch, glass, whatever the word is, grabbed him right from the bottom of the sea. No, they don't. Claws on the bottom. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to make analogies, whatever. But anyways, they got him. He's got a new playground to play with, and also a lot of developers have been working on hardening the security, etc., the functionality. But it still seems like it's probably not for everybody at this point. But I've been looking just at some alternatives, and there's been smaller models, NanoBot, Pico. Was it NanoBot or Pico Claw? Memu. There's a lot of them out there, but some of them are smaller models, maybe some better security. You still have to choose if you're going to run it locally or on a VPS. Again, most would argue never run these on your own personal computer. It'll be interesting to see when we finally get something that is either like OpenClaw with hard security. Is it possible that it's just as easy as downloading an app and going from there? That'd be, I don't know how far away that is, but right now, obviously, people are using like messaging apps, to access. But I think, taking a look more and more at Manus AI, their agents, and just recently been looking into, back again, this is circling back onto Abacus AI's Deep Agent, but I was looking at something that this may be something to check out. So, again, everybody seems like they got their own way of doing things, whether or not they're going local, whether or not they're hosting, on a VPS, yada, yada, yada. But everybody's got to kind of do their own thing. Anyways, that's all my thoughts are for now. Let me know what you think. I know it's a little, I'm just out driving, so I'm just not really, we're just driving, we're just chatting. That's on the mind. Was this helpful? Was it too short, too long, not relevant? There you go. Peace.